The air inside the Las Vegas Convention Center hummed with chatter, the kind that follows a remarkable speech. People were still clapping, leaning toward one another, trading comments about the young consultant who had just stunned an entire room of executives. Cameras flashed, business cards exchanged hands, but Alexandra Richardson wasn't soaking in the praise or the noise. She simply stepped down from the stage with her calm, steady stride, clutching her notes against her navy blazer. She had no idea that a ghost from her past was standing at the back of the hall. Colin Gillies froze the moment she appeared under the stage lights. His breath wavered. His fingers twitched at his sides. He tried to blink, convinced he was imagining her, because the last time he saw Alexandra she was broken, pregnant, and walking away from him forever. But she was real. She was right there. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "It's her." Years of buried guilt slammed into his chest so hard he had to brace a hand against the wall. His polished CEO image cracked in seconds. The noise of the crowd faded into nothing but a ringing in his ears. He took one shaky step forward, then another, but before he could call her name, before he could force out even a single word, he saw them. 3 small children, 2 little girls with curls bouncing as they moved, and a boy who clutched a crayon like it was treasure, waited just outside the hall doors with Karine. Their matching eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the woman they adored. Their laughter carried softly through the doorway. Colin stopped walking. His entire world stopped with him. His vision blurred. His throat tightened. A pressure formed behind his eyes as the truth struck him like a blow he wasn't prepared for. 3 children. 3. A sharp pain spread through his chest. His heart raced. His hands shook uncontrollably as realization crashed into him. They looked just old enough to be 3 years. He pressed his fist against his mouth to keep from crying out. "Dear God." His voice broke. His knees nearly buckled. He didn't need a test. He didn't need anyone to explain. The truth was staring straight at him, alive, breathing, laughing. He wasn't just a man with regrets. He was a father to 3 children he had never met. Before anyone knew what was happening inside that convention hall, before anyone understood why a billionaire CEO looked like he was about to collapse, there was a deeper truth hiding in plain sight. Because moments like this don't just come from business failures or broken deals. They come from the choices we make, and the ones we try to run away from. So let me ask you something real. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you ignored every warning sign, every red flag, hoping they would choose you the way you chose them? Have you ever protected your dignity with shaking hands, knowing the cost would break your heart? But you did it anyway, because you deserved better. Or maybe you walked away from a moment that changed someone's entire life, only to face the truth years later, that you were the one who caused the pain you feared. Life has a way of circling back. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait for you to become wiser. It shows up without warning, at the conference you never planned to attend, in the face you thought you'd never see again. And when that moment comes, it forces a single question. What do you do when the past you buried is standing in front of you, holding the future you threw away? Some people freeze. Some run. Some finally face the cost of their choices. Colin didn't get the luxury of choosing. His reckoning had already begun. Colin's breath caught when the little boy looked up. Those eyes. Blue, bright, and unmistakably familiar. His own. The child blinked curiously at the tall stranger staring from across the hall entrance. He tilted his small head, the same way Colin used to as a kid when trying to understand the world. And that single gesture nearly sent Colin to the floor. His vision darted to the 2 girls beside him. One had curls that framed her cheeks like soft clouds. The other had a quiet focus that reminded him of Alexandra when she was deep in thought. He didn't need DNA. Every feature was a mirror he wasn't ready to face. A wave of dizziness surged through him. His hand shot out to steady himself on a nearby pillar. Someone from the conference brushed past him, but he didn't hear the apology. He didn't hear anything except his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He whispered, barely getting the words out. "Oh God, what have I done?" And that's when Alexandra appeared at the doorway behind him. Not the shy consultant he once knew, not the woman he shattered years ago. She stood tall, confident, and composed, success radiating from her posture. But the moment her eyes landed on him, her entire expression hardened. All the warmth she carried for the world vanished in an instant. She reached for her children's hands with the reflex of a mother who has learned who is safe and who is not. The boy held her hand without question. The girls followed immediately. Alexandra didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't give him even a whisper of forgiveness. She simply turned away with her children and walked, not rushed, not afraid, but with the calm, deliberate strength of someone who rebuilt herself from nothing and refused to be broken again. Colin tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. His throat tightened, his knees weakened. For the first time in years, he understood the full weight of the life he threw away and the family he never knew he had. Moments like that don't disappear. They cling to the soul. Colin stood frozen, watching the woman he once loved guide 3 children away from him, children who carried pieces of his face, his history, and the choices he tried to bury. He didn't chase her. He couldn't, because some truths don't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. He had destroyed something that could never be repaired the same way again. So let me ask you, if you were in his shoes, what would you do? Would you look away and pretend you saw nothing? Would you finally face the consequences of a decision you made in fear? Or would you risk everything for a chance to do what you should have done years ago? Stay with me till the end of this story, because before everything is over, a billionaire CEO will learn one of the hardest lessons a human heart can learn. But first, welcome to Mr. Brugman's Stories, where powerful stories don't just entertain. They teach life-changing lessons. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button, because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. God bless you as you listen to this story. The hallway outside the convention hall still pulsed with the leftover excitement of Alexandra's presentation. People moved around in steady waves, professionals juggling tote bags, coffee cups, and phones as they discussed quarterly projections, market shifts, and the insights they had just heard from the brilliant consultant who captured the entire room. But for Alexandra, the moment she stepped into the hallway, everything narrowed to a simple mission: reach the exit, breathe fresh air, and find Karine and the kids. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, a steady rhythm that kept her grounded after the intensity of speaking on stage. A few attendees approached her with polite smiles, trying to offer congratulations. She nodded and thanked them, but her focus remained ahead. She was not expecting the past to be standing 10 steps behind her. Colin had not moved since he saw her. His feet felt rooted to the ground, as if the universe itself had anchored him in place. He watched her walk away with the same quiet grace he remembered, shoulders strong, posture composed, chin lifted slightly with confidence she earned through fire. 3 years. 3 years since he destroyed everything. 3 years since the night he stood in her apartment, pushing a check toward her with trembling hands. 3 years since she tore it to pieces and told him to get out. And now she was here, not broken, not pleading, not looking at him with the same soft eyes that once melted every hardened part of him. No, this woman was rebuilt, and the truth of that stung more than anything he'd ever faced. She rounded the corner into the main lobby, where sunlight poured through towering glass windows. The brightness outside made her silhouette glow, strong, unshaken, unreachable. Colin swallowed hard and finally forced his legs forward. He needed to speak to her, if only for 10 seconds, if only to say nothing. He realized, with a painful twist in his stomach, that there were no words strong enough to repair what he had done. Still, his feet moved. He passed 2 conference attendees who recognized him and whispered, "Isn't that Colin Gillies? Why does he look like he's seen a ghost?" Their curiosity bounced off him like raindrops. He barely noticed them. His eyes stayed locked on the path Alexandra had taken. But when he finally reached the lobby, she was already steps ahead, walking toward the exit where the sunlight spilled across the floor in long bands. He raised a hand slightly as if to reach for her. "Alex." He breathed. She didn't turn. She didn't pause. Her stride stayed steady, purposeful, unwavering. It was the silence that cut deepest, because it was the silence of someone who no longer gave him space inside her heart. He quickened his pace despite the tightness in his chest. His mind raced back to their last moments together, her tears, her shaking voice, the strength she had left him with when she forced him out of her home. The look in her eyes that night, the look he never forgot, returned to him now with crushing force. A cold awareness washed over him. He didn't deserve for her to stop. He didn't deserve a single second of her attention. Still, he pushed forward. "Please," he whispered under his breath, as if the universe might grant him one small mercy. Just one. As he moved closer, Alexandra glanced back for the briefest moment. Her eyes met his, and the world froze. The air felt colder. The sound around them dimmed. Their past rushed between them like a storm neither had the strength to outrun. Her expression didn't soften, didn't flicker, didn't welcome. It hardened, sharply, decisively. It was not anger. It was not hatred. It was something far worse. She had moved on. And the space where he once lived in her heart was now filled with 3 children who needed her more than any memory of him ever could. He tried to speak again, but his throat closed. His voice came out thin, barely recognizable. "Alexandra, please." She looked at him a second longer, measured, distant, then turned forward and stepped through the glass doors into the bright Las Vegas heat. The doors slid shut behind her with a soft mechanical hiss. Colin stopped in the center of the lobby, surrounded by murmuring attendees, yet completely alone. His thoughts spiraled in every direction, but one truth pierced through everything. If he didn't follow her now, he would lose whatever chance remained to make things right. He forced air into his lungs, squared his shoulders slightly, and began walking. He wasn't running. He wasn't chasing. He was confronting a past he should have faced 3 years ago. With each step into the sunlit courtyard outside, his pulse pounded harder. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know how she would react. But he knew one thing. He had to try. The sun outside the Las Vegas Convention Center was warm against Alexandra's skin. As she stepped into the courtyard, she paused only long enough to take a steadying breath. Her fingers tightened instinctively around the small hands beside her, Madison on her left, her bold curls bouncing as she tried to skip along the edge of the walkway, and Madeline on her right, quiet and thoughtful, watching every passing face. Mason stayed at Corinne's side, holding one of his crayons like a treasured keepsake. They had come to support their mother, to celebrate her moment, to be her joy after a morning of hard work. She refused to let anyone, especially Colin, disrupt the peace she'd built. Corinne glanced at her sister, reading the tension in her jaw. "You okay?" she asked softly, keeping her voice calm so the children wouldn't pick up on the shift. "I will be," Alexandra whispered, forcing her shoulders to relax. "Let's head to the park. They've been waiting all morning." Just mentioning the park made Madison squeal. "Swings, Mommy, swings." Her energy tugged a smile from Alexandra. Small, but real. "Swings," Alexandra said, brushing a curl from her daughter's face. "Let's go." The family walked toward the nearby green space, a comfortable distance from the conference center. The park was a modest, accessible spot just outside the strip. Wide paths, shade trees, a playground area filled with families enjoying the bright afternoon. It wasn't fancy. It was familiar. It was safe. Exactly what Alexandra needed. The moment they entered the grass, the children broke free with a burst of delight. Madison sprinted toward the slide, Mason climbed onto a rocking bench toy, and little Madeline toddled after her siblings, determined to keep up with their energy. Corinne spread a blanket under a tree and set down the bag of snacks, apple slices, crackers, and juice boxes. "Go on, sis. Sit. Breathe. You did incredible today." Alexandra exhaled slowly and lowered herself onto the blanket. "Thank you. It just caught me off guard." Corinne didn't need an explanation. "He doesn't deserve even a second of your stress." Alexandra nodded, rubbing her palms together as if needing to release the shock still clinging to her skin. "I wasn't expecting him. Not here. Not ever again. Life doesn't always ask permission," Corinne murmured, eyes following the kids as they climbed the small play structure. For a moment the world settled back into something soft. Children's laughter, leaves rustling in a mild breeze, the rhythmic creak of the swings. Alexandra felt her heartbeat ease. Then she felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. Her chest tightened. She looked up toward the entrance of the park, and her stomach dropped. Colin stood there. He wasn't storming in with arrogance or entitlement. He wasn't striding in like a man used to boardrooms and ownership. He looked shaken. His steps were unsure, almost hesitant, as they carried him across the grass. His usually composed appearance, perfectly styled hair, tailored suit, felt out of place against the backdrop of families, strollers, and scattered toys. Corinne followed Alexandra's line of sight and stiffened immediately. "Oh no." Corinne rose to her feet with a protectiveness only family can summon. "Absolutely not." Colin raised both hands slightly, palms open, his voice shaking. "Please, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just—" Corinne cut him off, stepping forward like a shield. "You shouldn't be here." Her calm was gone. This was the older sister who had held Alexandra through nights of heartbreak, who fed 3 newborns beside her, who protected her through storms Alexandra never asked for. Colin swallowed hard. I just want to talk to her, or to the children you ignored before they even existed. Corinne's tone was sharp and hollow, leaving him exposed. He winced, as if the words physically struck him. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear I didn't know they were born. Corinne's eyes widened. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. Alexandra stood now, calm but cold. She stepped beside Corinne, not behind her. Enough. Let him speak. Corinne hesitated, torn between frustration and trust. But she stepped slightly aside, still ready to intervene the moment something felt wrong. Colin looked at Alexandra like a man who had spent years starving and suddenly tasted water. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. I know you don't owe me anything, not even your attention, but I needed to see you. I didn't expect all of this. Alexandra's voice remained unwavering. What do you want? His gaze shifted past her, just for a second, to the children on the grass. Madison had paused her climbing and was staring at the newcomer with open curiosity. Mason was hugging his rocking toy a little tighter. Madeline remained clutching her juice box, watching quietly with wide, cautious eyes. They didn't know who he was. They didn't recognize him. And yet, he was frozen in place because he recognized them instantly. Colin's breath hitched. The ache in his chest spread like a bruise. I just needed to understand. When I saw them outside the hall, I couldn't breathe. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, Alexandra repeated quietly. There was no anger in her tone, only truth. Alexandra. His voice cracked. You have every right to hate me. I don't hate you, she said, steady and composed. You don't take up enough space in my life for that. Corinne let out a quiet, approving hum. Colin closed his eyes briefly, pained by the reality he had created. When he opened them again, his voice was steadier. I won't lie. I came here hoping you might give me a chance to explain. You saw what you needed to see, Alexandra replied. I'm not doing this right now. He nodded, swallowing the disappointment. His eyes drifted once more to the children, and that subtle glance shifted everything. Because Madison, bold and unfiltered as always, trotted toward Alexandra and tugged her arm. Mommy, she whispered loudly, who's that man? Alexandra's chest tightened. Just someone Mommy used to know, sweetheart. Go back and play. Madison obeyed, skipping back toward the slide with the same carefree rhythm as before. But Colin nearly folded. He stared at the ground, fighting to keep himself together. His hands trembled in a way he couldn't hide. Everything he had built, money, titles, success, felt painfully useless now. He had no right to stand near these children, but he also couldn't walk away. Alexandra, he whispered, please, give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She stared at him for a long moment, measured, controlled, unbroken. Then she made a decision. Corinne, she said gently but firmly, take them home. Corinne blinked, unsure. Are you sure? Yes. Alexandra nodded. They don't need to be here for this. Corinne gathered the triplets, lifting Madeline into her arms and guiding Mason and Madison toward the stroller. As they walked past Colin, Corinne gave him a look that carried years of anger, a warning carved from loyalty and love. But Colin didn't return it. He couldn't. His eyes remained on the children as they left, each step carving deeper guilt into his heart. When they finally rounded the path and disappeared from view, Alexandra folded her arms but didn't step back. 5 minutes, she said. Use them wisely. Colin exhaled shakily. This was the beginning of a confrontation he'd spent 3 years running from, and now had no choice but to face. The park felt strangely quiet after Corinne pushed the stroller down the path with the triplets tucked safely inside. Without their voices, their laughter, their small footsteps pattering across the grass, the world felt too open, too honest. Alexandra stood a few feet away from Colin, arms crossed, posture straight, her expression unreadable. She looked every bit like the woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes, steady, composed, guarded. Her voice was the first to break the silence. You have 5 minutes. Colin swallowed, his throat painfully dry. He nodded once, gathering himself. But how did someone condense 3 years of regret, guilt, hope, and truth into something that didn't sound like an excuse? He started with the only thing that mattered. I'm sorry. Alexandra didn't flinch. Her gaze didn't soften. She simply waited, as if testing the weight of those two words and finding them far too light. "You said that already in the hall," she replied calmly. "Is there anything else you want to add?" Colin rubbed his palms together, fighting to keep his voice steady. "There's a lot I need to say, but I know I don't deserve much of your time, so I'll go straight to it." He paused, and his eyes drifted for a moment to the empty space where the children had stood minutes earlier. That absence hit him harder than their presence had. It was the absence he had created. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said quietly. "Or about what I did." Alexandra's jaw tightened. "Thinking about me didn't change anything you chose." He nodded. He didn't deny it, because she was right. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I need you to understand. I regretted that night every single day since it happened." A faint, humorless exhale escaped her. "Regret without responsibility is just memory, Colin." Her words struck deep. "I know," he repeated, softer, almost to himself, "and I failed at everything that mattered that night, not just as a partner, but as a man. I let fear drive me, fear of my father, fear of the merger collapsing, fear of losing everything I thought defined me." He pressed a hand over his chest as if steadying the ache. "But I should have protected you. I should have stood by you. I should have chosen our children." Alexandra's eyes flickered, just slightly, but her tone remained even. "You didn't. You told me to get rid of my pregnancy. You wrote a check." He looked down, ashamed. "I did, and I hate myself for that." Silence settled between them, not empty, heavy. Alexandra took a slow breath. "You walked out that night and never looked back. You didn't call. You didn't try to understand what I went through. You didn't show up. And when I left the company, you had every resource in the world to find me. But you didn't." Colin winced at the truth. "I was a coward. I kept hoping you'd reach out, that you'd give me some sign." "A sign?" Alexandra's laugh was soft but wounded. "I was carrying 3 babies alone. What sign did you expect?" His shoulders sagged. "I don't have a defense. I only have the truth." "Then say it." He met her eyes, and for the first time since they'd spoken, his voice didn't shake. It broke. "I regretted everything the moment I walked out of your door." She didn't respond. Her stillness forced him to continue. "I broke off the engagement a month later. I couldn't marry someone when all I felt was guilt and loss. Her family pulled out of the hotel partnership, and my father nearly tore the company apart trying to rebuild the deal. He blamed me for everything, said I'd ruined my future." Alexandra raised an eyebrow. "You did?" "Yes," Colin agreed immediately. "But not because of the merger. Because I destroyed the only real future I actually wanted." His voice faded for a moment. He took in a breath. "When my father realized I wasn't changing my mind, he tried to force me back into the arrangement. Threatened to cut me off, remove me from the company, replace me at the board. I fought him. I fought him harder than I've fought anyone." "That's what you should have done for me," Alexandra said, not with anger, but with a simple truth that landed like a blade. He nodded. "I know. I was too late." She didn't speak again. Instead, she waited, giving him the space to either crumble or continue. He continued. "I even tried to find you," he confessed. "Not at first, but after months passed, after things calmed down, I started looking. But you left everything behind. You changed numbers. You disappeared. I told myself maybe you didn't want to be found. I didn't push harder because I was afraid of facing you. So you assumed I'd taken the money and gotten rid of the pregnancy." Alexandra's voice trembled, not in weakness, but in fury she had spent years restraining. Colin closed his eyes briefly. "Yes. I told myself lies that were easier to live with, and I've regretted them every day since." Alexandra stepped closer, not emotionally, but physically, to ensure every word she delivered reached him with clarity. "Let me tell you something, Colin," she said. "I carried those babies alone. I watched over them at night alone. I held them in the NICU alone. I fed them, rocked them, cried over them alone. I built a life for them without you, not because I wanted to, but because you left me no choice." Colin listened with tears sliding down his face. "And now," Alexandra continued, "you show up at a conference, see the children you abandoned before. They had a chance to take their first breath, and suddenly want a place in their lives?" His voice cracked open at the edges. "I don't expect you to trust me, and I don't expect them to even know who I am right now, but I'm begging you. Let me try." Alexandra didn't respond immediately. She looked past him, toward the park entrance where her children had disappeared with Corinne minutes earlier. Those 3 little lives were her entire world. Every choice she made revolved around their safety, their happiness, their future. Colin followed her gaze. He knew whatever she decided next would shape everything, for him, for her, for those children. After a long moment, Alexandra turned back to him. "Here are my rules." His breath caught. "You will not confuse them. You will not show up without permission. You will not disrupt their sense of security. You will meet them when I say, how I say, and where I say." Colin nodded quickly. "Yes, anything. And if I see even a hint of inconsistency in your effort," she continued, "I will end your access immediately. I will protect them above everything else." "I understand," he whispered. "I won't fail them." Alexandra exhaled, not out of relief, but out of acceptance that a new, uneasy path had begun. "This isn't for you," she said firmly. "This is for them." Colin wiped his face and nodded again. "I know." Her next words were the ones that carried the weight of 3 years of pain, survival, and strength. "You get one chance, Colin. Don't break it." And with that, she stepped back, the space between them no longer defined by heartbreak, but by boundaries she built with purpose. This moment, this reckoning, became the foundation of everything that would follow. The desert sun glared across the Las Vegas skyline as Alexandra Richardson stepped out of her rideshare, heels clicking against the polished stone walkway leading into Gillies Industries' glass tower. She paused for a moment, gripping her leather portfolio against her chest, taking in the vast panels of reflective glass that stretched so high they nearly pierced the sky. A deep breath steadied her nerves. This was bigger than any consulting contract she'd taken before. The stakes were high, the corporate culture notoriously ruthless, and the media was already murmuring about the financial catastrophe brewing inside the Gillies empire. But Alexandra had not come to Vegas to shrink. She came to win. Inside the lobby, cold air wrapped around her like a welcome shield from the desert heat. The marble floors gleamed beneath suits and structured dresses as employees hurried between elevators. Their badges glinted under recessed lighting. Their voices were low and clipped, the sound of people who worked under constant pressure and unspoken expectations. A receptionist with a stiff smile checked her in. "You're the consultant? They're expecting you on the top floor." Alexandra nodded politely and stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, her reflection stared back at her, poised, professional, a woman who had built her career on discipline and sharp instincts. Growing up with her older sister Corinne taught her responsibility early, and working twice as hard as everyone around her taught her resilience. She was used to being underestimated. She was used to proving people wrong. But this assignment carried a different weight. Rumor had it that the CEO, Colin Gillies, was drowning under pressure. The elevator chimed as it reached the executive floor. When the doors opened, a long hallway stretched before her, carpet muffling each step. Framed photos of the Gillies family legacy lined the wall. Generations of success, charity events, ribbon cuttings, and industry accolades. Alexandra's eyes lingered on a picture of a younger Colin next to his father, Robert Gillies. Both wore suits. Both looked crafted for the world they influenced. But whereas Robert's expression carried stern pride, Colin's eyes seemed distant even then, as if he understood the cost of carrying a legacy. A senior assistant led Alexandra into a spacious conference room. Board members sat scattered around a long table, murmuring to each other. Suits, silver hair, polished watches, old money energy radiated off them. And then the room shifted. Colin Gillies walked in. Tall, controlled, sharp suit, blue eyes that carried the tension of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. He scanned the room, then landed on Alexandra. For a moment he paused, as if surprised, or impressed. Then he stepped forward, extending his hand. "Alexandra Richardson." "I've heard excellent things." His voice was smooth but clipped with fatigue, his handshake firm. Alexandra met his eyes and saw something unexpected, hope mixed with desperation. "Thank you, Mr. Gillies," she replied. "I'm ready to get started." One of the board members cleared his throat. "She looks young," he whispered, not quietly enough. Alexandra pretended not to hear. Colin did hear, and his jaw tightened ever so slightly. "She's the consultant who already saved 2 companies larger than us," Colin said evenly, shutting down the doubt in the room. "Age has nothing to do with brilliance." A small flicker of gratitude warmed Alexandra, though she didn't show it on her face. The meeting began, and Alexandra immediately took command of the data projected on the screen. She dissected financial leaks, exposed bottlenecks, highlighted structural failures, all with a calm, confident voice that made even the most hardened board members straighten their seats. Colin didn't interrupt her once. Instead, he watched her with focused attention, arms crossed but relaxed, like a man finally seeing a solution to a problem that had been strangling him. By the end of her presentation, the room was silent. Then Colin broke the quiet. "I want everyone to follow her lead," he said. Starting now, there was no debate, no pushback, just respect. After the board members dispersed, Alexandra gathered her materials. Colin approached her again, the stress lines around his eyes softening. "You were exceptional," he said. "I haven't seen the board that quiet in months." She offered a modest smile. They were open to hearing the truth. "That's a good sign." Colin gave a short, tired laugh. "They're not always open to it. But today, they were." A moment of quiet stretched between them, not awkward, but weighted with unspoken recognition. She saw a side of him the board didn't, a man trying to uphold a legacy without drowning in it. "Walk with me?" he asked. She followed him through the hallway into his office, a glossy space overlooking Vegas, with windows tall enough to make anyone feel small. When he loosened his tie slightly, she saw a human underneath the CEO armor. "You're here because we're close to collapse," he admitted. "And I don't trust many people with that truth." "Collapse can be prevented," she replied, "but only with transparency." He leaned against his desk. "Then you'll be the first person here I'm actually transparent with." That honesty surprised her. Consultants rarely received this level of openness, especially from CEOs of family dynasties. Usually it was layers of politics, pride, and carefully constructed facades. But Colin was different. "We'll need to work long hours," she said, opening her planner. "No shortcuts." He nodded. "I can do long hours." He meant it, and she felt the shift begin. The next few days were a blur of analyzing files, drafting new projections, restructuring budgets, and dissecting years of mismanagement. Every late evening, Alexandra found herself still seated across from Colin, both surrounded by empty coffee cups and spreadsheets. During their first long evening, she noticed how he always stared out the window for a few seconds before making tough decisions, as if grounding himself. "Everything okay?" she asked. He hesitated, then spoke honestly. "My father built this company brick by brick. He raised me to take it over. Failure isn't an option, or at least, that's what he drilled into me." Alexandra rested her pen. "Pressure isn't the same as leadership, Colin." He looked at her, really looked at her. Most people deferred to him. She didn't. "I wasn't prepared for this," he confessed quietly. "The merger problems, the closed-door battles, the board losing trust. All of it feels like I'm carrying a storm on my back." She held his gaze. "Then let me carry some of it with you. That's why I'm here." Something in his expression shifted, not attraction yet, but the start of trust. But the truth about his engagement surfaced late one night. They had been reviewing documents past midnight. The office lights reflected softly against the window as Vegas sparkled below. He rubbed his face, exhausted. "There's something you should know, something the board knows but you don't." She sat still. "I'm engaged," he said, "not by choice. It's a business arrangement tied to the merger. My father pushed for it." Alexandra didn't speak, but her heartbeat moved into a sharper rhythm. He continued, "She and I barely speak. There's no relationship there. But the merger depends on it. Or at least, that's what everyone keeps telling me." His eyes lifted to her. "I don't want you to think I'm hiding anything from you." She exhaled, slow and steady. "Thank you for telling me." But inside, something complicated unfurled. That night marked a turning point, the moment when late-night work began to carry a pull neither of them acknowledged out loud. The pull deepened days later when Colin stayed behind after the board left, shoulders heavy from another battle with investors. "You okay?" she asked gently. He lowered his head into his hands. "I'm tired of pretending I'm holding everything together. You're the only one I feel I can talk to." The words were simple, but the impact was real. She closed her laptop and spoke softly. "You don't have to pretend with me." Their eyes met. Two worlds, his wealthy, pressurized world and her grounded, hard-working world, collided in a way that felt inevitable. They didn't touch. They didn't cross any line. But something formed in that quiet moment that neither could deny anymore. An unspoken connection, a slowly growing bond, a crack in his carefully built walls, and a spark in her life that would soon become a fire she never saw coming. By the end of her third week at Gillies Industries, Alexandra had transformed chaos into clarity. Reports were streamlined, financial leaks identified. Executives who once ignored her now requested her presence in their meetings. Word spread quickly that the young consultant possessed a mind sharp enough to cut through the mess no one else could untangle. But the rising pressure came with long nights, and those nights often meant working side by side with Colin. The more time they spent together, the more their rhythm became natural. He anticipated her questions before she asked them. She finished his sentences when he got lost in thought. Their collaboration wasn't just effective, it was alive. Late one Friday afternoon, Alexandra finished presenting her recovery strategy to a room half filled with skeptical board members. She held her composure as she expertly fielded their doubts, using data and logic to quiet their fears. By the end, even the most stubborn of them nodded in reluctant respect. When the meeting ended, Colin approached her with a look she hadn't seen before, gratitude mixed with relief. "You carried the room," he said. "Actually, you carried the entire company today." She lifted an eyebrow. "Let's hope they follow through. A plan is only as strong as its execution." He chuckled softly, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Alexandra, I mean it. You saved us today." Before she could respond, one of the board members interrupted to shake her hand. Others followed. It was the first time she felt truly accepted in that space. When the room emptied, Colin exhaled deeply. "Let me take you to dinner tonight. You deserve a moment to breathe, and a good meal." "My treat." She hesitated. Lines between personal and professional worlds mattered to her. But the sincerity in his eyes wasn't romantic or flirtatious. It was deeply human. A man finally catching a breath after weeks underwater. "All right," she agreed. "Dinner?" His smile was small but warm. "Great. I know just the place." They met outside the building an hour later, the desert heat fading into a cool evening breeze. Colin was no longer in his suit jacket. He wore a crisp shirt, sleeves rolled up, exposing forearms that subtly mirrored the vulnerability he'd shown her nights before. Alexandra's hair was pinned back neatly, her blouse elegant but simple. She didn't dress to impress. She dressed as a woman who respected herself. Colin opened the passenger door of his sleek black car. She stepped inside, inhaling the faint scent of leather and cedar. The drive down the strip was alive with movement, neon lights, tourists, performers, the unmistakable hum of a city that never rests. When they pulled up to a restaurant known for its skyline view, she blinked in surprise. "Colin, this place looks..." "Relaxed," he said before she could finish. "No paparazzi, no business associates, just dinner." Inside, warm lighting and soft music set a steady mood. They sat near a window overlooking the glittering city. For the first time in weeks, Alexandra saw Colin not as a CEO, but as a man letting himself unwind. He looked around the room briefly, then back at her. "I haven't done this in a long time. Dinner?" she asked. "Dinner without an agenda," he clarified. That made her smile. "Well, tonight's agenda is simple. Eat and breathe. Two things I genuinely forgot how to do." When their drinks arrived, Colin lifted his glass lightly. "To clarity, and to the woman who brought it to my company." Alexandra paused, then raised her glass. "To progress." Their glasses met with a soft clink. Conversation flowed surprisingly easily. They talked about the company, their childhoods, their first career hardships. Alexandra shared stories about growing up with Corrine, how they relied on each other after losing their mother. She spoke of her neighborhood, her church, the community events that shaped her values. Colin listened, really listened. "No one in my circle talks like you," he admitted quietly. "It's refreshing." "And what do they talk about?" she asked. He shrugged. "Money, image, influence. They talk in numbers and expectations, not feelings." She tilted her head. "Do you talk about feelings?" He laughed softly. "I did tonight." That admission stirred something inside her. She didn't say it aloud, but she admired how bluntly he confronted his own truth. Many men in his position would hide behind bravado. After dinner, they walked to the balcony where the city stretched endlessly below. Vegas sparkled like a universe pretending to be simple. "I don't usually let people this close," Colin said, leaning on the railing. "Most people want something from me." "And you think I don't?" She teased lightly. He met her eyes. "You're the first person in years who only wants the truth." She couldn't deny it. and she couldn't deny the pull that grew between them, a draw neither of them intended, but neither fought. The breeze brushed past them. He reached up to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. It was such a small gesture, but it froze her breath. His voice lowered. "Alexandra." She should have stepped back. She should have redirected the moment. But she didn't move. He brushed his fingertips along her jawline, slowly, carefully, as if asking permission without words. Her eyes lifted to his, and the unspoken question between them finally ignited. He leaned in, and she let him. Their lips met in a soft, searching kiss. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't reckless. It was two people finding a moment of peace in a world that demanded too much from both of them. When they separated, Alexandra felt her heartbeat tremble inside her chest. "I didn't expect that," she whispered. "Neither did I," he admitted. But the truth was bigger. The truth was that she had been holding a space inside her for someone who saw her, truly saw her. And he had been searching for a place where he could unravel the pressure he never confessed to anyone. They found that in each other. The affair didn't begin with fireworks. It began gradually, a slow shift that neither acknowledged aloud. After the kiss came shared secrets. After secrets came moments where their hands brushed and lingered too long. After that came nights when staying late wasn't about crisis response. It was about not wanting to leave the room they shared. He invited her to his penthouse once, not for intimacy, but because he wanted her opinion on documents he didn't trust his executives with. His penthouse stood high above the strip, floor-to-ceiling windows, private elevator, marble counters, a world built on privilege. Alexandra took it in quietly. She was impressed, but she wasn't intimidated. This was his world, not hers. She sat at his kitchen island while he brought her tea. The CEO brought her tea. That meant something. Their relationship deepened like that, in small moments, stolen time, and late-night confessions that felt too genuine to be mistakes. But for every step forward there was a shadow behind them. His engagement. Alexandra never pushed. Colin never solved it. He told her he would. He believed he would. But every time he tried, his father intervened. His fiancée's family intervened. The merger hung over his head like a chain he couldn't break. Alexandra tried to remain hopeful, but hope turned into longing, and longing turned into pain. Still, she stayed, because every moment with him felt real. Every touch, every kiss, every quiet night whispering futures they were too afraid to grasp. She fell harder than she intended. She fell completely, and she believed, truly believed, that he was falling too. She had no idea how wrong she would be. The night Alexandra discovered she was pregnant, the world outside her apartment buzzed with neon noise, but inside, everything was quiet enough to hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The test lay on her bathroom counter. Positive, clear, immediate, undeniable. She sank onto the edge of the bathtub, hands trembling, not from fear but from the weight of change. Her first thought wasn't panic. It was hope. A child. Their child. A future she secretly imagined in the quiet corners of her mind. A future where Colin no longer lived split between two worlds. She pictured telling him. She pictured his surprise softening into joy. She pictured them holding on to each other as they made a plan together. It wasn't naive. It was love, a love she believed they both felt deeply. She messaged him to come over. When he arrived later that evening, he looked tired but relieved to see her. He leaned down, kissed her forehead, and said, "You sounded serious. What's going on?" "Sit," she whispered. For the first time that night, nerves shook in her voice. They sat on her couch, the gentle glow of two candles flickering on the table. The moment felt intimate, safe, as if it were the perfect setting for life-changing news. She took his hand, guiding it to her lower stomach. Her voice cracked with emotion. "Colin, I'm pregnant." For a second, just 1 second, something bright crossed his face. Surprise, wonder, a softness that almost looked like happiness. Then it vanished, completely, as if someone had ripped the floor out from under him. He yanked his hand away, stood up abruptly, began pacing. His breath turned shallow. His fingers pressed into his temples. "Alexandra, I can't have this right now." Her chest tightened. "Colin, slow down. It's going to be okay." "No," he snapped, stopping mid-stride. "You don't understand what this means. This will destroy everything. Everything. Her voice rose with hurt. Everything like us, our future, our child. He flinched, but panic had taken over. This merger is hanging by a thread. My father is already furious with our numbers. The engagement, her family, if they find out about this, everything collapses. Alexandra stared at him, disbelief washing over her. I thought love mattered more to you than a contract. You knew about the engagement, he said quietly, almost accusingly. I told you I'd find a way out, but not like this, not with a baby involved. The word baby felt like a stab when spoken with dread, not joy. You're not hearing me, she whispered. We can work through this. I don't expect your life to be perfect tomorrow. I just want honesty and support and… He cut her off. Alexandra, there is no version of this where I can keep my position, keep the business stable, and keep this quiet. My father will never forgive this. He'll dismantle every part of my career. What about dismantling me? She shot back. Your partner, the woman who's been by your side every night for months, the woman you say you trust. He exhaled sharply, looking anywhere but at her. I'm trying to be practical. Practical? Alexandra stepped toward him, voice trembling. Is that what you call walking out on a life you helped create? He didn't answer. Silence pressed against the walls. Then, he walked to her small desk, pulled out a blank check from the notebook she kept for bills and began writing. At first she didn't understand. She stood frozen, waiting for him to speak. He tore out the check. His hand shook as he held it out to her. This should be enough, he said hoarsely. To end it, Alexandra gagged on her breath. End it. He swallowed hard. It's the only way to keep your life stable. My life intact, everything, contained. Contained. He spoke of their baby like a problem to hide. She stared at the check. Zeros. Too many of them. Money that could have changed her life, but not like this. Not at the cost of her soul. Her voice fell low, deadly low. You want me to erase our child? He stepped closer, desperation rising. Alexandra, please. If this gets out, everything I've built, everything my father built, it will all fall apart. I need you to understand the pressure I'm under. And what about the pressure I'm under? She cried. What about my body, my health, my heart, my future? Do those not matter? They do, he insisted. But timing, this timing. Timing, she echoed. Babies don't schedule themselves around mergers. His lips parted, but no words came. He had nothing, no real defense, only fear disguised as logic. She stepped back slowly, feeling something inside her snap like a wire pulled too tight. Colin, she said, voice steadier than she felt. Look at me. He did, eyes frantic, chest rising with uneven breaths. I'm keeping this baby, she said, with or without you. The room fell still. Colin's shoulders slumped in defeat. His eyes glistened with a grief that came decades too early, the grief of a man who would regret this moment for the rest of his life. But regret didn't stop him. He took her hand, tried to press the check into her palm. Take it, he whispered. Please, just take it. That was the moment she broke. She ripped her hand away, snatched the check from him only long enough to tear it down the center. The pieces fluttered to the floor. Colin stared at them, stunned, helpless, hollow. You think you can buy my integrity? She asked, voice trembling. You think you can buy my motherhood, my child's existence? He tried to speak, but she raised a hand sharply. No, you don't speak. You don't get to justify this. Tears filled her eyes, but her posture remained tall. You say your father will ruin you? Fine, let him. You say the merger will fall apart? Let it. You say your life will collapse? Then let it collapse. Her next words were quiet, but lethal. You will not collapse me. He finally stepped back as if the truth physically struck him. Alexandra, get out. He froze. Get out. He tried again, voice fragile. Please don't do this. I'm begging. No, she whispered. You begged me to choose money over my child. You begged me to lose the most precious part of myself. Now I'm begging you for the only thing you can still give me. She pointed to the door. Leave. His face crumpled, not with anger but with the dawning realization that he had irrevocably destroyed something sacred. He walked slowly to the door, hesitating with his hand on the knob. She refused to look at him. He opened it. The hallway light spilled into the dark room, and then he walked out of her life. When the door clicked shut, the silence felt suffocating. The candles flickered beside her, small flames against a world that suddenly felt enormous. She wrapped her arms around herself, sank to the floor, and sobbed, not because she was weak, but because she had just made the strongest decision of her life. A decision that would shape the next 3 years. A decision that would give the world Madison, Mason, and Madeline. A decision Colin would one day see with his own eyes and break. She wiped her tears, lifted her head, and whispered to the tiny life inside her, "I choose you." And the vow that followed became her new beginning. I will never depend on him again. The morning after Colin walked out of her apartment, the world felt unfamiliar. Alexandra woke with a heaviness pressing against her chest, the kind that made simple movements feel like wading through water. Her body was exhausted, but her mind had not rested at all. Every time she blinked, she saw the torn check on the floor. Every time she inhaled, she remembered his voice, frantic, pleading with her to erase the life inside her. But the silence in her apartment wasn't empty. It was protective. It was hers. She pushed herself out of bed slowly, one hand subconsciously pressing against her stomach. The small life inside her, the life Colin rejected, filled her with a strength she didn't have the night before. And then her phone buzzed. It was a text from Corinne. "Are you okay? You've been quiet. Talk to me." Alexandra stared at the message for a long moment before her vision blurred with tears. She didn't bother responding. She simply called. Corinne answered on the first ring. "Alex, what happened?" The tremor in Alexandra's voice was answer enough. Corinne didn't wait for explanations. "I'm coming." 20 minutes later, Corinne burst into the apartment with the urgency of someone who didn't need details to know her sister was breaking. She wrapped Alexandra in a long, fierce embrace, rocking her gently. "Tell me," Corinne whispered. Alexandra tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. She handed Corinne the torn pieces of the check she'd saved from the floor. Corinne stared at them, her expression shifting from confusion to horror to rage. "He gave you this?" Corinne's voice sharpened. "For what?" Alexandra swallowed. He wanted me to get rid of the baby." For a second Corinne froze, as if her whole body locked under the weight of the sentence. Then she exhaled sharply, her anger rising like a wave. "That man has lost his mind." Alexandra didn't defend him. She didn't soften the truth. She simply sank onto the couch, tears silently escaping. Corinne sat beside her, pulling her close again. "You're moving in with me," she said firmly. "Right now." Alexandra blinked. "Corinne, no, I'm not asking. You're packing a bag. You're not staying alone in this apartment with that pain sitting in every corner. You're coming home." Home meant the small rental house Corinne shared with 2 other women from her community, both nurses, both kind, both women who had helped Corinne through her own hardships. The house constantly smelled like cooking spices and shea butter, filled with laughter on good days and prayers on bad ones. Alexandra hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're my sister," Corinne said. "You're never a burden." With slow movements, Alexandra gathered a small bag of clothes. She looked around the apartment that once felt like her sanctuary. After Colin left, every inch of it felt contaminated with grief. She didn't look back when she left. Corinne's home welcomed her with warmth, literal and emotional. The smell of simmering stew drifted through the kitchen. Gospel music hummed low on a speaker. The women living there, Denise and Carla, greeted Alexandra without prying questions. Denise hugged her and said, "We're glad you're here, sweetheart." Carla squeezed her hand gently. Rest first, strength later. The tenderness nearly made Alexandra cry again, but Corinne guided her to the spare room. "You can cry all you need," she said softly, "but just know, you're not alone anymore." That night, Alexandra slept deeper than she expected, cradled by the safety of a home filled with people who cared about her. The following week, Corinne insisted they schedule an ultrasound. Alexandra felt nervous, unsure what to expect, unsure if she would break down again, unsure if she could handle hearing the heartbeat after the emotional storm she'd just endured. But she went, not because she felt strong, but because the baby deserved to be recognized. At the clinic, Corinne held her hand tightly as the technician prepared the equipment. The gel was cold against Alexandra's stomach. The room felt still, almost sacred. "Let's take a look," the technician said. Seconds passed, slow, heavy seconds. Then, a sound filled the room. A steady, rhythmic melody, a heartbeat. Alexandra covered her mouth as tears gathered. Corinne squeezed her hand harder. But then the technician frowned slightly, not in concern, but in concentration. Looks like we have more than one here. Alexandra's head snapped toward the screen. More than one? 2 heartbeats, the technician said gently. You're having twins. Corinne gasped. Twins? Oh, Alex. The room swayed for a moment as the news sank in. 2 babies, 2 lives, 2 futures growing inside her. A mix of awe and fear washed over her. Twins. She wasn't ready, but she was ready enough to love them. She reached for the screen, tracing their tiny shapes with her fingertip, whispering, I'm here. I promise I'm here. Weeks passed. Corinne made sure Alexandra attended every appointment. Denise cooked meals that eased her morning sickness. Carla drove her to work when fatigue hit. The Vegas black community around Corinne rallied quietly but powerfully. Women dropping off groceries, an older neighbor offering baby clothes, a church friend gifting pregnancy vitamins. No one judged. No one asked. No one dug into the pain behind Alexandra's eyes. They supported her simply because they believed in community, something Colin never understood. Her belly grew faster than she expected. She began researching freelance consulting work she could do from home. She organized her documents, updated her portfolio, planned for a future that did not include Colin. But the second ultrasound changed everything again. This appointment was routine. The technician smiled, adjusted the screen, and began the scan. Within seconds, the smile shifted into surprise. Oh, she murmured. Hold on. Alexandra tensed. Is something wrong? No, not wrong, the technician said slowly. Just unexpected. She angled the screen, zooming in. Corinne leaned forward. What is that? The technician exhaled softly. Looks like you're not carrying 2 anymore. Alexandra's breath hitched. What do you mean? You're carrying 3, she said. Triplets. The room froze. Corinne's eyes widened so dramatically she covered her mouth with both hands. 3, Alexandra, 3. Alexandra stared at the screen, stunned, overwhelmed, shaken to her core. 3 heartbeats. 3 flickers of light. 3 children. Shock rippled through her. Fear followed. But then, something else rose beneath it all. A fierce, steady determination. Her voice trembled. I've got you, she whispered. All 3 of you. I've got you. Her hands slid protectively over her stomach. Corinne pulled her into a trembling hug. You're not alone, Alex. I'm right here. We're all here. But Alexandra wasn't crying out of fear anymore. She was crying because the universe had given her not 1 chance at motherhood, but 3 reasons to rise. 3 reasons to rebuild. 3 reasons never to look back at the door Colin walked through. Triplets. Her future wasn't just shifting. It was exploding into something she never imagined she could navigate, but something she would conquer because she refused to fail these children. That night, she wrote her new vow in a notebook Corinne bought for her. I will not break. I will not bend. I will raise these children with strength, dignity, and love. And from that moment on, Alexandra was no longer a woman grieving a broken relationship. She was a mother preparing for battle. Alexandra's pregnancy progressed faster than any doctor predicted. Triplets had a way of rewriting every rule, every symptom amplified, every week heavier than the last. By the time she reached her 3rd trimester, her back ached constantly. Sleep came in fragments, and every movement felt like carrying an entire world balanced inside her. But she never complained. Corinne watched her with awe. You're tougher than you think, she said one morning, while helping Alexandra ease into a kitchen chair. Most people would have quit their jobs by now. Alexandra tucked a hand beneath her belly and smiled faintly. I don't have space in my life for quitting. Denise glanced over from the stove. You don't have space in your life for nonsense either. Those babies already know their mama is a warrior. Carla set vitamins and a tall bottle of water on the table. Let's keep her standing long enough to finish growing 3 humans. Their laughter filled the kitchen, and for a moment Alexandra forgot the heaviness pressing on her ribs. Friendship, support, community. The house carried all 3, holding her up on the days her own strength wavered, but no amount of support could prepare her for what came next. One evening, at just over 34 weeks, Alexandra felt an unfamiliar tightness grip her stomach. At first, she thought it was another false alarm. She had experienced contractions before, the kind the doctors told her were normal with multiples. But this time, the tightening didn't fade. It intensified. And then came the sharp pressure. Corrine noticed the change instantly. "Alex, talk to me. What's happening?" Alexandra gripped the arm of the couch, her breath catching. "Something's different. This one hurts." Within seconds, Corrine was kneeling beside her. "We're going to the hospital now. Denise, Carla." The women rushed into action, helping Alexandra to her feet, grabbing her bag, keys, and jacket. The pain rippled through her again, stronger, longer, deeper. Her knees buckled. Corrine held her firmly. "Stay with me, Alex. Breathe. We've got you." The drive to the hospital was a blur of streetlights and labored breaths. Alexandra braced herself against the seat, squeezing Corrine's hand until their knuckles turned white. By the time they arrived, a nurse rushed them into a triage room. "Triplets at 34 weeks?" she said urgently. "Let's move her to the delivery suite." Alexandra's heart hammered with fear. She heard beeping monitors, rushing footsteps, urgent instructions, but it all felt distant, like she was underwater. The doctor examined her quickly. "She's dilating. We need to prepare for a C-section immediately." Corrine's voice trembled as she stood near the bed. "Alex, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Alexandra nodded weakly, gripping her sister's wrist. "Just don't let go." "I won't." A nurse placed an oxygen mask over her face, explaining each step calmly, but Alexandra could barely absorb the words. Her mind raced. Was it too soon? Were the babies ready? Would they breathe on their own? Fear clawed at her chest, sharper than any contraction. As they wheeled her toward the operating room, Alexandra whispered beneath the mask, "Please be okay. Please, all three of you, just be okay." The doors swung open. Cold air rushed over her skin. Bright lights filled the sterile room. The team moved with practiced coordination, prepping her body, positioning equipment, checking monitors. Corrine squeezed her shoulder before they separated her from the operating field. "I'm right behind this curtain," she said. "Talk to me if you get scared." Alexandra nodded again, tears slipping into her hairline. The anesthesiologist leaned close. "You'll feel pressure, not pain. We'll tell you every step." Pressure came quickly, strong hands, movement, shifting. And then baby number 1 is here. A thin cry pierced the room. Weak, but real. A sob broke from Alexandra's chest. She forced her voice out. Is the baby okay?" "We're assessing now," a nurse answered. "He's breathing. He's small, but he's fighting. Her son, her first child. Mason." Her vision blurred as she whispered his name to herself. Moments later, the doctor spoke again. "Baby number 2, incoming." More pressure, more pulling. Another brief cry, this time softer, as if the world shocked her little lungs. "Your daughter is here. She's doing well, needs support, but she's responsive." Another wave of relief washed over Alexandra. Madison, her strong girl. The medical team worked quickly now. Triplets required speed and precision. "Last one," the doctor said. "Almost there." Alexandra felt the pressure again, heavier this time. She clenched her teeth, unable to move, fighting the panic clawing at her throat. Then, a faint cry, the smallest yet. "Your second daughter is here. She's breathing, but we'll take her to the NICU immediately." Madeline, her smallest miracle. Alexandra sobbed openly, no longer able to hold anything inside. "They're here," she whispered. "My babies, they're really here." Corrine leaned over the curtain, tears streaming. "You did it, Alex. You brought them into the world." The surgery continued as doctors closed the incision, but Alexandra barely heard them. Her mind fixated on the 3 tiny lives being transported to the NICU, each one fighting, each one belonging to her. Hours later, once she was stable and awake, a nurse gently wheeled Alexandra into the NICU. Nothing could have prepared her for the sight. 3 incubators lined the wall. 3 tiny bodies connected to monitors, wires, warmers, oxygen lines. 3 heartbeats glowing softly on digital screens. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed by the mixture of awe and fear. A NICU nurse approached kindly. "They're small but strong. They're fighters." Alexandra stepped closer to the first incubator. Mason. His chest rose and fell quickly, too quickly, but steadily, his tiny fists curled by his cheeks. She rested her palm lightly against the glass. "Hi, my boy. Mama's here." Next, Madison. She was slightly bigger, her face peaceful, her hand twitching as if reaching for something. "You're beautiful," Alexandra whispered. "You're perfect." Then Madeline, the tiniest. Her eyes fluttered beneath closed lids, and her little hand opened and closed reflexively. Alexandra's heart squeezed painfully. "You hold on," she murmured. "I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." Corinne stood behind her, wiping her own tears. "Look at them, Alex. You made 3 miracles." Alexandra nodded slowly, absorbing the truth with every breath. "Nothing," she said firmly, "will ever separate me from them. Nothing." She leaned closer to the incubators, her voice steady now, steady with purpose, steady with fire. "I will protect you. I will fight for you. I will give you a life filled with love and safety. I don't care who failed us. I won't fail you." Her vow sealed itself into the air, powerful enough to carry through years. Madison's fingers twitched. Mason's foot kicked lightly. Madeline's tiny hand curled toward the light, as if all 3 heard her, as if all 3 believed her. And in that moment, Alexandra understood something she couldn't have known before. This wasn't survival. This was destiny. For the first few weeks after the triplets came home from the NICU, Alexandra lived in a state of beautiful chaos. Nothing about early motherhood felt organized or calm, but everything felt purposeful. The days blurred into nights, nights blurred back into days, and every moment revolved around 3 tiny heartbeats who needed her for everything. Corinne set up a small nursery in the spare room of her house. It wasn't glamorous. Mismatched cribs, gently used blankets, diaper boxes stacked in a corner, but it radiated warmth. Every item had been donated, gifted, or purchased with love. "You don't need fancy things," Corinne said one night as they assembled the last crib. "You just need to keep showing up for them. That's what makes a home." Alexandra smiled softly. "I can do that. I can always show up." And she did. The mornings always began the same way. Mason woke first. Always Mason. He didn't cry loudly. He grunted, squirmed, and kicked the mattress until someone came. By the time Alexandra lifted him into her arms, his face relaxed instantly, as if simply seeing her made the world make sense again. Madison was next, always alert, scanning the room with focused eyes even as an infant. A nurse in the NICU once joked she looked like she was already studying people. "You're going to run something big one day," Alexandra whispered each morning while dressing her, smoothing her soft curls with gentle hands. Madeline always woke last, often curled into herself like she was holding on to a dream. She didn't fuss much. She watched, observed, absorbed the world quietly. Alexandra would scoop her up, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "You're my calm before the storm," she murmured. 3 babies. 3 distinct personalities. 3 small souls who filled the house with life. The laughter in Corinne's home grew louder. The noise doubled, then tripled, until Denise joked that she needed earplugs on her days off. But despite the exhaustion, no one resented the change. Carla often came home from her nursing shift with little treats, cartoon socks, plush toys, hair bows. "For my babies," she'd say. "And no, you can't argue with me." Corinne, however, took on the role of co-general, enforcing schedules, making checklists, organizing doctor appointments. "You're not doing this alone," she reminded Alexandra constantly. "We're all raising them together." And for the first time in months, Alexandra believed she could breathe again. But raising triplets was not calm, not even close. Feedings rotated with military precision. 6 a.m., Mason 6:15 a.m., Madison 6:30 a.m., Madeline. By the time she finished the cycle, it was often time to start again. Diapers seemed to multiply on their own, forming small mountains that never stayed conquered for long. Bottles stacked in the sink like an army waiting for reinforcements. Some days Alexandra laughed at the madness. Some days she cried into her pillow before kneeling beside the cribs and whispering gratitude for 3 breathing children. She lost sleep, weight, time, but she never lost focus. To survive, she had to rebuild herself faster than she'd expected. Around the 4th month, Alexandra began taking freelance consulting projects. She converted Corinne's dining table into a makeshift home office, balancing spreadsheets and proposals while rocking a baby seat with her foot. Clients from her former network reached out, impressed by her sudden availability. She didn't tell them why she left Gillies Industries. She didn't tell them about Colin. She simply delivered quality work. Her reputation soared. "She's sharper now," one client said on a conference call. "More precise than she was at Gillies." Karine overheard and smirked. Motherhood rewires the brain. She's running a 3-person startup right now. Of course she's sharper. Little by little, Alexandra built a new professional identity, one defined not by corporate walls, but by independence, resilience, and quiet strength. Every dollar she earned went toward savings for the triplets, diapers, doctor visits, clothes, formula, and a growing emergency fund she managed with military discipline. Her life didn't look like the one she imagined. It looked better, because it was real. As the months passed, the triplets grew into their personalities even more. Mason loved sound, toys that rattled, voices that sang, even pots banging in the kitchen. He responded with delighted squeals every time. Madison was bold. She rolled over first, pulled herself up first, tried to walk first, though she often toppled straight into someone's lap, laughing at her own fearlessness. Madeline remained observant. She studied faces, tracked movement, responded emotionally to tone. If someone in the house cried or laughed, she reacted with empathy far beyond her age. Alexandra often sat in the nursery at night, watching them sleep, whispering her gratitude to God. "I don't know how I got lucky enough to have all 3 of you," she said once while adjusting a blanket. "But I'm going to make sure the world knows your names." She meant it, and the world would soon know hers again, too. One afternoon, while the babies napped and Alexandra worked on a consulting proposal, she received an email notification. She almost ignored it. She received dozens of inquiries each week, but something about the subject line made her open it. Business Innovators Conference, keynote speaker invitation. She blinked. Her heart thudded once, hard. The message continued. "Ms. Richardson, we have reviewed your recent consulting work and believe your strategic insights would be invaluable to our audience. We would be honored if you would deliver a keynote address at this year's conference in Las Vegas." She read it twice, 3 times. Karine noticed her frozen posture. "Alex, what's wrong? Are the babies waking?" Alexandra shook her head slowly. "No." "Karine, look." She handed her the phone. Karine's eyes widened, then her face split into a smile so bright it filled the room. "Oh my God, Alex, this is huge." Alexandra inhaled deeply, unsure if she should laugh or cry. "I haven't spoken at anything large since Gillies. What if I'm not ready?" Karine planted her hands on her hips. "You survived heartbreak. You carried triplets. You handled a NICU. You're raising 3 babies without flinching. And you rebuilt your entire career from the dining table. You are more than ready." Alexandra's eyes softened as she whispered, "Vegas, back where everything started." "Maybe this time," Karine said gently, "you get to rewrite what Vegas means for you." The words settled in Alexandra's chest like a calling. She looked toward the nursery, where the triplets slept peacefully, the reason she fought, worked, and kept breathing through every hardship. "I'll do it," Alexandra whispered. For them, with that decision, a new chapter in her life began. Not the one she lost with Colin, but the one she built with courage. The world was about to see Alexandra Richardson again. And she wasn't returning as the woman who fell for a CEO. She was returning as the mother of 3, the woman who survived, the strategist who rebuilt her life from the ground up. She was returning as someone unstoppable. Alexandra stood in the middle of Karine's living room, arms folded tightly across her chest as she mentally rehearsed what she would say. She had already checked the clock 3 times in the past 10 minutes. She wasn't nervous for herself. She was nervous for her children. This was uncharted territory, a moment she'd spent nearly 3 years avoiding. Karine moved around the apartment with sharp focus, pretending to tidy up, though everything was already spotless. Her movements were stiff, almost military-like. She wasn't just preparing the home, she was preparing to protect. Every now and then she shot a glance at the front door, as if daring it to open too soon. The triplets, oblivious to the emotional charge in the room, sat around their playmat. Madison was building a tall stack of blocks and announcing each height, as if she were a reporter. Mason was dragging his toy dinosaur in slow, deliberate circles, testing how far it could go before tipping over. Little Madeline was flipping through a picture book, humming softly and tapping each page with her tiny finger. They were in their world, their safe world. Alexandra inhaled slowly and reminded herself why she agreed to this. Her children deserved clarity, not secrets. Stability, not confusion. And if Colin truly intended to change, this was the first test. At 3 p.m. sharp, a knock sounded at the door. Corinne's neck snapped toward it. "He's early," she muttered, though he wasn't. Corinne marched toward the door, but Alexandra lifted a hand. "I've got it." She reached the door and placed her hand on the knob. Her pulse kicked up. For a moment, she shut her eyes, not in fear, but in resolve. Then she pulled the door open. Colin stood there, holding a small tote bag filled with children's books and soft toys. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy. He had taken her words to heart. He wore a simple dark sweater and jeans. No tailored suit, no glossy CEO presentation. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run a hand through it repeatedly in the car. His eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were a mixture of gratitude, nerves, and something else, reverence. "Aye," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but the tremor beneath it was unmistakable. Alexandra nodded. "Come in." Corinne stood at the far end of the living room with her arms crossed like a bouncer at a nightclub. Colin stepped inside and immediately removed his shoes, setting them aside neatly. He scanned the room with clear, cautious respect. No wandering eyes, no judgment, only humility. When he spotted the triplets sitting on the floor, he froze. His breath caught so visibly that Alexandra almost felt it in her own chest. His eyes softened, then glossed over as he swallowed hard. He didn't move closer, not without permission. "Are they okay if I sit?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alexandra nodded and gestured to the open floor area. "Go ahead." Colin lowered himself carefully onto the rug, moving slowly so the children wouldn't feel startled. He set the tote bag beside him and waited. Madison noticed him first. She paused mid-stack and stared, her head tilted in curiosity. Mason followed suit, raising his dinosaur defensively like he was evaluating whether this man was friend or foe. Madeline peeked over her book and blinked at him, her quiet observation as sharp as ever. Colin lifted a small picture book from the tote. "I brought something," he said softly. "Would you like to see?" Madison stood up immediately. Of course she did. She was bold, intuitive, and quick to approach anything new. "What's that?" she asked, marching right up to him with fearless certainty. "It's a storybook," Colin replied gently. "Would you like to pick one?" She nodded, grabbed the book, and inspected it like it was a sacred artifact. Mason scooted closer next, drawn by curiosity, but keeping a respectable distance, holding his dinosaur like a shield. Madeline rose to her feet last, quiet as always, inching toward the group until she sat down with careful precision. Colin looked up at Alexandra for permission, silent, respectful. She nodded once. "Proceed." He opened the book, showing colorful pages. "This one is about a little bear learning to be brave." Madison immediately plopped into his lap without hesitation. Corinne jerked forward instinctively, but Alexandra touched her arm, a silent signal to relax. Mason sat next to them, legs crossed. Madeline sat on the other side, leaning in gently. Colin cleared his throat and began reading. His voice was steady, warm, and filled with a depth that surprised Alexandra. He didn't perform the story, he simply told it with sincerity. He altered his tone slightly for each character, enough to keep the children engaged but not enough to appear like he was trying too hard. 2 minutes in, Mason handed him the dinosaur as if offering a peace treaty. Colin accepted it with care. "Does he have a name?" he asked. Mason nodded seriously. "Dino." "Well," Colin said with a small smile, "Dino looks brave too." For the next 30 minutes, the living room felt like a foreign universe, one where softness lived alongside caution. Colin shifted between reading, listening, answering toddler questions, and marveling quietly at each child's personality. Occasionally, Alexandra's eyes met his. They didn't exchange words, but the silent message was clear. Don't get comfortable. Earn this. Every moment. Corinne watched from the kitchen doorway, arms still crossed, but even she couldn't deny what she saw. Colin wasn't performing. He wasn't showboating. He wasn't overcompensating. He was simply a man trying, learning, adjusting, and absorbing every second. When the story ended, Madison clapped. "Again?" she demanded. Colin chuckled softly. "We can read another one. How about this?" He pulled out a second book. "No," she insisted. "Same one." He nodded. "All right." As he read the story again, slower this time, Alexandra leaned against the wall, arms folded, not in defense but in evaluation. She watched the man who once shattered her world. She saw guilt in him. She saw humility, But she also saw something else, quiet devotion, the kind that comes from realizing you nearly lost what mattered most. When the children finally got restless and wandered back to their toys, Colin stayed seated, waiting for a cue. He didn't move toward Alexandra or speak out of turn. Corinne walked past him and whispered under her breath, "You hurt her again, even once, and you'll deal with me." Colin nodded respectfully. "I understand." Alexandra stepped forward, signaling that the visit was coming to an end. "They liked you," she said cautiously. Colin exhaled shakily, as if he had been holding back that breath the entire hour. I can't tell you what that means to me." They warmed up quickly, she added, her tone neutral but honest. "They're perfect," he whispered. "Truly perfect." Alexandra didn't respond. Not verbally. But her silence wasn't rejection. It was contemplation. "All right," she said softly. "That's enough for today." Colin stood slowly, nodding. "Thank you for letting me be here, really." As he walked toward the door, Madison shouted, "Bye, mister," and waved enthusiastically. Colin turned, eyes bright. "Bye, sweetheart." When the door shut behind him, Corinne let out a breath she'd been holding for an hour. "Well," she said, hands on hips, "that went better than I expected." Alexandra didn't answer right away. She stared at the door for a long moment. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't reconciliation. This wasn't healing. It was step one. A very, very small step, but still a step. Colin arrived the next week, exactly on time. Not a minute early, not a minute late. That alone told Alexandra something. He wasn't trying to impress her with grand gestures. He was trying to show consistency, predictability, reliability, things that matter when raising children. The triplets were gathered near the living room window, waiting. Alexandra hadn't told them he was coming. She didn't want to create expectations. But children have an uncanny way of sensing shifts in routine. Madison kept glancing outside as though she anticipated something exciting. Mason held his toy dinosaur with a familiar look of intention. Madeline hummed softly while stacking blocks, stopping every few seconds to look toward the door. When the knock finally came, all three heads jerked up at once. Corinne opened the door this time, narrowing her eyes at Colin like she was scanning his soul before letting him step inside. He thanked her politely, and she stepped aside without speaking. Alexandra observed everything, his posture, his breath, the careful way he held the small tote bag. He brought only a few simple items again, a coloring book, some crayons, and a wooden puzzle shaped like animals. Nothing expensive, nothing over the top. The triplets surrounded him instantly. Colin knelt so he was eye level with them. "Hi, guys." Madison reached for the puzzle before he even finished speaking. "Open," she demanded, tugging at the package with both hands. Colin smiled. "Let's open it together." Mason sat beside him, watching with focused eyes. Madeline quietly tucked herself into the space near his knee, gently leaning her shoulder against him. Alexandra couldn't deny it. This was the first time she'd seen the three of them gravitate towards someone so quickly. As they played, Colin paid attention to each child equally. He didn't favor the boldest or hover over the quietest. He followed Madison's fast pace, matched Mason's thoughtful examining, and spoke softly to Madeline when she pointed to the pictures in her book. He didn't force affection. He didn't overreach. He simply existed in their world, letting them take the lead. That alone was a change from the man she once knew. Over the next several weeks, his visits became part of their weekly rhythm. Every week, he showed up at the exact same time. Every week, he brought simple educational toys or books. Every week, he listened to the children more than he spoke. Whatever Alexandra asked, he followed without question. No sugary snacks. Yes, sanitize your hands before playing with them. No picking them up unless they initiate. Yes, stay on the floor at their level. No pretending we're a family. Yes, respect every boundary. Colin's humility didn't look rehearsed. It was quiet and steady. And the triplets noticed. Madeline, who was the slowest to bond with new people, began bringing her stuffed rabbit to him as an offering. Mason turned him into a teammate in pretend play battles, assigning him the role of helper hero. And Madison, unsurprisingly, tested him the most. Sometimes she would hand him a block tower and make him rebuild it exactly as she wanted. Sometimes she demanded he read the same storybook 3 times. Sometimes she'd lecture him in toddler language about how the crayons needed to be arranged by color. Through every test, every command, every toddler-demanded complication, Colin stayed patient. He didn't break. He didn't sigh. He didn't rush. He simply tried. 2 months after the first supervised visit, Alexandra allowed the first outdoor meeting. They met at the same park where he had first seen the children. This time, Colin didn't approach from the shadows of trees. He walked toward them openly, carrying a small backpack of essentials. Sunblock, water, wipes, he explained quietly. Alexandra blinked at him. You packed wipes? He nodded. They always need them, right? She didn't answer, but the small spark of surprise in her eyes was undeniable. The children ran toward him with the kind of excitement that only toddlers could produce, pure, loud, unfiltered joy. Park, park, Madison shouted while tugging his hand. Swing, Daddy? Mason asked. Colin froze. It was the first time any of them had used the word. Alexandra saw his posture stiffen. His hands shook. His voice caught in his throat. Mason tugged again. Daddy swing? Colin slowly crouched to the boy's level, his eyes glistening. Yeah, buddy. I'd love to. Alexandra swallowed hard. She hadn't prepared for that moment. She had expected the kids to warm up, maybe build trust, but hearing that word so soon struck her in a place she rarely exposed. As Colin carried Mason toward the swing set, Madison and Madeline raced after them. Corrine, standing beside Alexandra, whispered, They've claimed him now. Alexandra didn't respond. Her throat felt tight, emotion she didn't want spilling out. The outdoor visits continued. Each week, Colin proved something new. He learned to tie their tiny shoes without fumbling. He learned Madison's habit of wandering off during play. He learned Mason needed reassurance during loud noises. He learned Madeline's preference for being gently talked through things before participating. He learned to pay attention. One afternoon, while the triplets played in the sandbox, Alexandra noticed him sitting on the bench with a small notebook. He wasn't writing about work. He was jotting down reminders. Madison likes red cup, not blue. Mason eats slowly, needs extra time. Madeline sings when she's nervous. Validate. Alexandra stared at him for a long moment. People can pretend with words, but small habits reveal truth. He wasn't putting on a show. He was studying how to be a father. Behind the scenes, Colin quietly made another move. One that Alexandra didn't ask for, but one that mattered deeply to him. He opened 3 savings accounts, one for each child. Modest ones, nothing dramatic. He didn't announce it with fanfare or use it as leverage. He handed Alexandra a simple envelope one afternoon. This is for them, he said softly. Not for you, not for me. Strictly their future. Inside were statements showing small college funds he had begun building. Alexandra hesitated. Accepting money from him once nearly broke her life. She stared at the papers, her heart pounding. This isn't for control, Colin said gently. You said no grand gestures, so I started small. I'll deposit into them quietly each month. No announcements, no expectations. If you want full control of the accounts, I'll transfer access. There was no pressure in his voice, only willingness. After a long silence, Alexandra nodded. I'll manage them. Of course, he replied. She placed the envelope in her folder, not with fear this time, but with a strange new acceptance. Throughout all of this, one rule stood strong. There was absolutely no romantic tension. None. Alexandra didn't allow it. Colin never pushed. Whenever their hands accidentally brushed while passing a toy, they both flinched away politely. Whenever the children tried to pull them into the same picture, Alexandra stepped aside immediately. Whenever Colin looked at her with the weight of memories, he shifted away. It was co-parenting, not reconciliation, not repair of the past, just structured involvement for the children's benefit. And yet, even without romance, the emotional terrain was intense. Every week Alexandra assessed. Did he follow instructions? Did he stay grounded? Did he keep consistent? Did he show up with intention? Every week Colin passed the test. Slowly, she loosened the tight boundaries. After 3 months of strict observation, she said 7 words that marked a new chapter. You can take them to the zoo. The shock in his eyes was overwhelming. He hit it quickly, but not well enough. Thank you, he said, voice steady. Don't thank me, she replied. Just be responsible. He nodded. I will. And he meant it. The zoo visit was a milestone. Colin showed up with 3 identical small backpacks, each with a water bottle, napkins, a snack cup, and a light sweater. He even carried a small first aid kit. Corrine nearly laughed. Well, look at that. He's equipped. Alexandra didn't laugh. She simply watched. The children had the time of their lives, feeding giraffes, naming penguins, screaming at goats. Colin didn't take photos of himself. Only of them. Only of moments he wanted to remember because they mattered to them, not his image. When he returned the children, they were exhausted, chattering, and full of joy. Madison proudly announced, "Daddy let me touch a turtle." Colin looked terrified. It was supervised, very supervised. Alexandra shook her head lightly, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. For the first time since their history shattered, she spoke without tension. "Good job today." Colin froze, absorbing the words like sunlight. "Thank you," he whispered. And he walked away, not lingering, not pushing, not hoping for more than what he'd been given. Just showing up again next week. A new rhythm had formed. Not forgiveness, not friendship, not love. Just a quiet, growing stability. The kind that children could trust. The kind that adults had to earn. And for the first time since the triplets were born, Alexandra looked at her life and wondered, maybe healing didn't require forgetting. Maybe it required consistency. Maybe step by step was enough. For weeks, something in Colin shifted, subtle at first, then undeniable. The man who once let his father dictate every decision now carried himself differently during each visit. He wasn't timid. He wasn't lost. He wasn't trying to win Alexandra's affection or present a polished appearance for her approval. He was focused on three things only, Madison. Mason, Madeline. The triplets were becoming anchors in his life. Anchors that pulled him in a direction he had avoided for years. Fatherhood wasn't a concept anymore. It was daily learning, constant adjusting, and being present in ways he never imagined he could be. And slowly, that responsibility began rewriting who he was. But while Colin embraced this new identity, he knew something bigger loomed, something he could no longer avoid. His father, the man whose approval once governed his every choice, the man whose voice he feared more than consequences, the man whose shadow had pushed him into that catastrophic decision 3 years ago. Colin knew he couldn't fully build a life with his children while hiding them in silence. He had to sever the last chain tying him to the version of himself that destroyed Alexandra's trust. So on a quiet Thursday morning, before his next visit, he drove back to the estate he'd avoided for months. The Gillies estate hadn't changed. Massive iron gates, pristine lawns, marble pillars, a mansion built to impress, not to comfort. Colin walked through the grand entry hall with a heaviness in his chest. Robert Gilly sat in his study, reading financial reports. The man barely looked up when Colin entered. "You're late," Robert said coldly. "I didn't schedule an appointment," Colin replied. Robert folded his papers slowly, irritation already forming. "Let me guess. You finally decided to return to your responsibilities instead of wandering off doing God knows what." Colin inhaled deliberately. He felt that old instinct, to shrink, to appease, to avoid conflict, trying to surface. But that instinct belonged to a man who no longer existed. "I came to talk," Colin said. "Not about the company, about my children." Robert froze. "Your what?" he snapped. "My children," Colin repeated. Robert stood abruptly. "If this is about that consultant—" "It is," Colin cut in, firm, "and about the 3 children she carried." "My children—" Robert's face reddened in an instant. "Tell me you didn't." "I did," Colin said, "and I abandoned them. Because of you, because I was afraid of what you'd say, afraid of ruining the merger, afraid of disappointing you." Silence dropped hard between them. Colin continued, voice steady. "I was a coward. I let fear dictate my choices, and I hurt the woman I loved. I missed the birth of my children. I missed their first steps, their first smiles, their first words, and I will live with that guilt for the rest of my life." Robert's jaw clenched. "And now what? You expect this family to accept some scandal? 3 children out of wedlock with a woman who vanished from your life? A woman who—" Colin slammed his palm on the desk, making his father flinch. "You will not speak about her that way." Robert stared at him, stunned. Colin stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not the intensity. "I don't care about your approval anymore. I don't care about legacy or inheritance. I care about being a father, a real one, not the kind who rules with fear, or who thinks money replaces responsibility. Robert tried to regain control. "Colin, listen to reason. This will damage the family, the company. The company survived without me," Colin said. "And it will continue without me if necessary." For the first time in their relationship, Colin saw something flicker in his father's eyes. Uncertainty, even fear. "You're willing," Robert whispered, "to give all of this up? For them?" Colin nodded. "Yes." Silence again, heavy, loaded. After what felt like an eternity, Robert sat down slowly. His face tightened, then relaxed, then hardened again. It was clear he wasn't ready to accept this new reality, but he understood one thing. His son was no longer under his control. "Do what you want," Robert muttered, defeated. "But don't expect the board to support you." "I don't expect anything," Colin said. "I'm done living for everyone else's expectations." He turned toward the door, pausing only once. "Being their father is the first thing in my life that actually feels right." He walked out, leaving the man who shaped him, but no longer controlled him, behind. Later that afternoon, Colin arrived at Alexandra's apartment for the scheduled outdoor visit. He looked exhausted, but lighter somehow, as though he'd finally cut away a weight he'd carried for years. Alexandra noticed immediately. "You look different," she said carefully. He didn't offer details. He didn't dramatize. He simply nodded. "I needed to handle something. For the kids." She didn't push further. If he wanted her to know, he would tell her in time. The triplets ran to him with a kind of joy that had become familiar now. Madison grabbed his hand. Mason brought him a toy truck. Madeline rested her head briefly on his knee in greeting before wandering off to pick flowers. He sank onto the grass with them, engaged and present, same as always. Alexandra watched closely, not as a former lover, but as a mother evaluating everything. She saw patience. She saw effort. She saw change, but trust was still distant. When the children ran toward the slides, Colin finally spoke quietly. "I told my father about them." Alexandra's heart skipped. "And?" she asked. He didn't take it well. "But I made it clear I'm choosing the kids over anything he wants." She didn't respond right away. Not because she doubted him, but because the version of Colin standing before her was nearly unrecognizable from the man she once knew. "You really did that?" she whispered. "Yes, and the company. If it costs me the company, so be it." Alexandra blinked. Not in disbelief, she could see he meant it, but in something else. A quiet acknowledgement that he was no longer letting someone else dictate his life. That was new. That was growth. Still, she guarded her tone. "The kids don't need grand gestures," she said gently. "They need stability." "I know," Colin replied. "That's why I'm doing this the slow way. Your way." The children called out for them. Together, they walked toward the playground, keeping distance but sharing the same path. Over the next several visits, an unspoken understanding formed. This wasn't about the past anymore. It wasn't about repairing romance. It wasn't about proving something emotionally. It was about consistency, boundaries, stability, shared responsibility. Alexandra kept control of the pace. Colin followed every guideline without protest. Corinne maintained her protective watch, but even she softened around him, just a fraction. One afternoon, after a smooth visit, Corinne pulled Alexandra aside. "He's trying," she admitted reluctantly. "Really trying. And not the fake kind of trying, the real kind." Alexandra nodded. "I see it. So, do you trust him yet?" Alexandra didn't answer immediately. "Trust might come later," she said. "But for now, I believe he's serious." That alone was progress. By the end of the month, something like a rhythm had settled over all of them. Colin became a fixture in the children's weekly lives. The triplets began mentioning him during breakfast or bedtime. Madison asked to show him her artwork. Mason saved new dinosaur facts to tell him. Madeline began handing him flowers each visit, little yellow ones she picked in the park. Alexandra watched it all with careful acceptance. She wasn't letting her guard down for herself. She was letting the kids form their own connection with a man who had changed more than she ever expected. There was no tension between her and Colin. No sparks, no lingering glances. Only clarity. He had a role now, a defined one. A father. And she was beginning to believe he could maintain it. Not because of promises, not because of emotion, but because of actions week after week. A fragile piece had taken shape, One built on caution, respect, and the slow rebuilding of something practical and necessary. CO parenting. They weren't rewriting their past. They were building a future for 3 children who deserved nothing but love, stability, and truth. And for the first time since the triplets were born, Alexandra felt the early signs of something she hadn't expected. Relief. Real, grounding relief. Because the burden of raising them alone, while she had carried it with pride, no longer sat solely on her shoulders. Colin was carrying a piece of it now, and he wasn't letting go. The morning of the triplets' 3rd birthday began with a kind of energy that filled the whole apartment. Bright, loud, contagious. Alexandra woke to the sound of 3 little voices tumbling down the hallway, their small feet thudding like determined drummers announcing the start of a parade. "Mommy, Mommy," Madison yelled. "Birthday," Mason added, hopping in place. Madeline, still rubbing her eyes, whispered, "Are we 3 now?" Alexandra scooped them into her arms, kissing each forehead. "Yes, my loves. Today you're 3. Their smiles burst open like confetti. The living room had already been decorated the night before, balloons tied by the window, a colorful banner stretched across the wall, a small table set up with cupcakes and juice boxes. Nothing extravagant, just warm, joyful, and filled with love. Corrine stood in the kitchen whisking pancake batter, humming to herself. "Birthday babies," she called out. "Come get your birthday hugs." The children rushed toward her, wrapping themselves around her legs. Alexandra watched the scene with a soft, full heart. 3 years ago, she'd wondered how she would survive this journey. Now she had the answer, through community, through support, through the determination that carried her every step. At 10 a.m. sharp, another knock came at the door. The children didn't run this time. They sprinted. Alexandra stepped around them, opened the door, and there he stood, Colin. Not hovering outside, not entering cautiously, just standing as part of a family rhythm that had taken months to build. He held 3 small, neatly wrapped gifts, each the same size, same wrapping, same weight. Fairness mattered to him now. He understood balance. He understood sensitivity. "Happy birthday, kiddos," he said, kneeling the moment they reached him. Madison hugged him first. "We're 3, she announced proudly. "I can see that," he said, smiling. Mason held up 3 fingers. 3 like this. Colin mirrored the gesture. "Perfect." Madeline tugged his shirt gently. "Did you bring books?" He laughed softly. "Of course I did." Alexandra stepped aside, letting him in. Their eyes met briefly, hers calm, his grateful. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. They'd made it here, together, but not together. As Keo parents, as adults who survived the worst and built something healthier. The birthday party wasn't crowded, just a handful of close friends from Corrine's church community, neighbors who'd become honorary aunties and uncles, and a few parents from the triplets playgroup. But today, something subtle shifted. For the first time, Colin didn't feel like an outsider hovering along the borders of their world. He didn't look like the man who once lived behind glass windows and executive walls. He moved among the families naturally, greeting them, answering questions about the children, and learning names, carefully, respectfully. No arrogance, no discomfort. One of the mothers whispered to Alexandra, "Is that their father? The way they look at him. That bond is real." Alexandra nodded. "Yes. He's been working hard to be here." It wasn't a defense. It wasn't an excuse. It was the truth. During the party games, Colin stayed on the ground with the kids, crawling through tunnels, helping them balance on foam stepping stones, and cheering when they toppled onto soft mats. Madison shouted his name every 10 seconds. Mason kept handing him random toys as if assigning him tasks, and Madeline rarely let go of his sleeve. The transformation wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady. At one point, as they gathered for cupcakes, Colin stepped back and watched the 3 small faces lit by candle glow. They leaned into Alexandra with such trust, such safety, that he felt something tighten in his chest. Not regret. He'd lived in that for years. This was something different. Gratitude. Awe. A quiet sense of belonging that he didn't try to claim, but was honored to witness. Alexandra lifted each toddler slightly to help them blow out the candles. The room erupted in claps and cheers. When the kids dove into their cupcakes, Colin approached her quietly. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," he said. "You earned it," she replied simply. He nodded, accepting the truth, not as praise, but as responsibility. Later that afternoon, when the guests had left and the children were busy tearing wrapping paper off their gifts, Alexandra stepped outside to the small back porch for some air. Colin followed a minute later, careful not to intrude but sensing she didn't mind the company. The porch light clicked on as the sun began to fade behind the Las Vegas skyline. The air was warm, with the faint sound of kids laughing through the open window. For a long moment, they stood side by side, not speaking. Colin rested his hands on the railing, staring out at the soft horizon. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think success meant power, influence, money, the kind of things my father valued." Alexandra didn't look at him. She wanted the words to come freely, without her gaze directing them. "But today," he exhaled, shaking his head lightly, "today I realized I don't need any of that. Being part of their joy, it was more fulfilling than anything I've achieved in a boardroom." Alexandra let the silence settle before responding. Children have a way of stripping life down to what matters. He nodded. "They do." Another pause. Then he spoke again, voice heavy with honesty. "I know I can't undo what I did, and I don't want you to think that I ever take lightly the pain I caused. You carried the hardest years alone. You built a life for them from nothing. I wasn't there, and that will always be my greatest failure." Alexandra inhaled slowly. He continued, gentler now. "But I'm grateful you let me in, even just like this. It's more than I deserve." She looked at him then. His expression was sincere, not seeking forgiveness, not begging for redemption, just acknowledging reality. "You've changed, Colin," she said quietly. "And I'm not talking about gestures or words. I'm talking about the way you show up for them, the way you listen, the way you stay consistent. That matters." His eyes warmed. "It matters because they matter." "Yes," she agreed. They both leaned on the railing, watching dusk settle over the neighborhood. For the first time between them, the quiet felt comfortable, not heavy, not strained, not filled with old wounds. Just peaceful, not romantic, not suggestive. Just two adults who had walked through fire and emerged with 3 beautiful reasons to keep moving forward. After a moment, Alexandra nodded toward the door. "We should go inside. They'll be looking for you." Colin smiled softly. "Lead the way," and together, still separate but aligned, they stepped back into the house where 3 tiny voices called out in excitement. This was not a reunion story. This was not a rekindled love story. This was something rarer: respect, growth, a new kind of family, a healthier one. And it began right here on the triplets' 3rd birthday. The triplets finally fell asleep after the birthday excitement, leaving toy wrapping paper scattered like bright memories across the living room floor. Madison had insisted on sleeping with her new storybook. Mason clutched a plastic dinosaur tighter than a treasure chest, and Madeline curled around her soft rabbit like it was her guardian. Once their breathing settled into steady rhythms, Alexandra gently closed the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. Corrine was already in the kitchen washing dishes, humming softly under her breath. The entire apartment had a warm afterglow, the kind that comes after a day filled with genuine joy rather than forced celebration. Colin stood in the living room, quietly gathering stray cups and paper plates so Alexandra wouldn't have to. He wasn't performing for praise. He wasn't trying to impress her. He just saw a need and stepped in. The man who once lived above responsibility was now kneeling on the floor, picking up cupcake crumbs. Alexandra leaned against the doorframe and watched him work. Not with softness, but with clarity. This was the version of him that had taken 3 long years to show up, humble, grounded, and fully aware of the cost of his choices. "You don't have to do that," she said gently. He looked up, a faint smile touching his face. "I want to." There was no tension in the room, no lingering anger, no resentment waiting to erupt, just a steady stillness that felt new and earned. Colin stood and wiped his hands on a napkin. "They're really happy," he said. Today meant something to them. It did, she agreed. "They're incredible," he added. "You've raised them so well, Alexandra." She didn't deflect. She didn't shrink. She accepted the truth of it. "Thank you," she replied. He swallowed, as though preparing for something important. "Can we talk? Just for a moment?" Alexandra nodded and gestured toward the small balcony. The night air was cool, and the soft hum of distant traffic filled the silence between them. They stood side by side, hands resting lightly on the railing, not touching, not leaning toward each other, simply sharing space. Colin exhaled. "I've been thinking about something for a while now, and I need to say it clearly before misunderstandings grow." Alexandra waited. "I don't want you to think," he continued, "that I expect anything beyond co-parenting. I don't want you to feel pressured or worried that I'm hoping for something romantic. I'm not." She blinked, surprised, though she shouldn't have been. This version of Colin always chose honesty now, even when it exposed him. He kept going. "Being a father to them, it's the most important thing in my life, and I don't want anything to complicate that. Not my past feelings, not my mistakes, not your boundaries." Alexandra's shoulders eased, not from relief, but from appreciation. Clear lines were healthy. Clear lines were necessary. "I'm glad you said that," she replied, "because I've been wanting the same clarity." Colin nodded, listening intently. "I don't hate you," she said softly. "I stopped hating you a long time ago. But I don't feel what I felt before. Those feelings were tied to a woman I used to be." He closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the words with quiet acceptance, not pain, not disappointment. "That's fair," he said. Alexandra stepped closer, not physically but emotionally, meeting his gaze directly. "What you and I had back then, it wasn't built on truth. It was built on fear, on pressure, on secrets, and on a man who didn't have the strength to stand up for what mattered. It wasn't healthy for either of us." Colin nodded slowly. "You're right. But what we're building now," she continued, "is healthier, stronger, real. It's not about us, it's about them. It's about creating a life for 3 little kids who didn't choose how they were, brought into this world, but deserve all the stability and love we can give them." His throat tightened, but he held her gaze, steady, present. "I respect that completely," he said. "And I respect you." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the truth settle. Then Alexandra did something she hadn't done since before everything fell apart. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, not out of longing, not out of nostalgia, but out of resolution. It was a hug with purpose. A hug that acknowledged pain, forgiveness, and boundaries all at once. A hug that closed the last chapter of what they used to be. Colin froze for a moment, caught off guard, but then gently returned the embrace. His arms didn't tighten possessively. They didn't tremble with regret. They simply held her with respect. When she pulled away, she took a step back, not out of distance, but out of clarity. "Thank you," he whispered. "For that. That's all it is," she said. "Closure, not a beginning." "I know," he replied, "and I'm grateful for exactly that." They returned inside, and Alexandra reached for her phone, pulling up photos from the day. "I'll send you these," she said. "The kids loved having you here." "I'd like that," he replied. As she handed him the phone, their fingers brushed. Nothing electric sparked, nothing stirred beneath the surface. It was simply a moment between 2 adults who had done the hard work of untangling their past. Just then, Madeline's sleepy voice drifted from the hallway. "Daddy?" Colin turned immediately, instinctively. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, stepping toward her. She reached out her small arms, half asleep. He lifted her gently, holding her against his chest. Her tiny head rested on his shoulder, and her hand curled into his sweater. Alexandra watched the scene, this man transformed, this child trusting, this moment sacred, and she felt peace. Not romantic peace, not reunited peace, a different kind of peace. The peace of acceptance, the peace of shared parenting, the peace of finally letting go of what once was. Colin kissed the top of Madeline's head softly before handing her back. "Good night, Angel." "Night," she whispered. Alexandra carried her back to bed, and when she returned, Colin was gathering his jacket. "I'll see them next Saturday," he said. She nodded. "Yes. Same time." He paused at the door. "And, Alexandra, thank you for choosing this path, for choosing clarity, for choosing maturity." She offered a faint smile. "It's what they deserve." With that, he left, and Alexandra exhaled, a slow, deep breath that felt like the final release of years of tension. She hadn't rekindled love. She hadn't reopened old wounds. She hadn't rewritten their past. She had let, and for the first time since the beginning of their story, she felt completely, beautifully free. This was not the love story people might expect. It was better. It was the story of 2 people choosing responsibility over fantasy, boundaries over desire, growth over history. A story of closure, pure, honest, and necessary. Days after the triplets' birthday, the apartment settled back into its usual weekday rhythm. Morning routines returned, cereal bowls clinking, shoes scattered near the door, the soft hum of cartoons in the background. But something in the atmosphere felt new, cleaner, steadier. Alexandra felt it first. A sense of alignment. A sense that the last missing piece of her emotional puzzle had been set into place during that brief hug on the balcony. Not because it reignited the past, but because it sealed it. It closed one era and opened another. She moved through her day with a lighter step, not outwardly noticeable, but deeply felt. The kind of peace that isn't loud, but settles into the bones. The triplets, in their innocent way, mirrored the shift. They played more calmly, fought less, clung to her less anxiously. Children always sense emotional climates. They feel stability the same way adults feel warmth. And Alexandra had spent 3 hard years building a fortress of stability around them. But now, she wasn't holding it alone. On a quiet Wednesday morning, she sat on the living room floor while the kids built a tall block tower. Madison stacked blocks confidently, narrating every placement like a tiny forewoman. Mason inspected structural stability, pushing lightly on each side to ensure it wouldn't collapse. Madeline hummed quietly as she added the final block, a small blue square, right at the top. "It's a castle," Madison announced proudly. "It's strong," Mason added. "It's ours," Madeline whispered. Alexandra smiled, feeling her heart tug at the symbolism right in front of her. These little ones were too young to understand the weight of what they were saying, but their words carried truth. Everything she had built these last years, every choice, every sacrifice, every long night, was reflected in that block castle, a structure made slowly, piece by piece. A structure that tipped at times, but stood upright with enough care. A structure built not from perfection, but from persistence. She leaned forward and touched the base blocks lightly. "You all made something beautiful," she said. "Something strong." Madison nodded. "We don't let it fall. And if it falls, we fix it," Mason added, proud of himself. "Again and again," Madeline whispered. Alexandra felt her breath catch in her throat. They weren't just building a toy. They were describing her life. And in that moment, she understood something profound. Life isn't about building something that never collapses. It's about choosing the courage to rebuild when it does. She sat back, watching the 3 of them, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, a warmth that didn't rely on romance or validation or nostalgia, but on purpose. Her purpose. Later that afternoon, after the kids were settled with crayons and coloring books, Alexandra opened her laptop. A message blinked at the top of her inbox. "We would like to invite you to lead the keynote panel at the Women in Leadership Summit." Her eyes widened slightly. This conference wasn't just a professional milestone. It was a platform for her story, her lessons, her voice. And now, for the first time, she felt ready to share more than her consulting expertise. She felt ready to teach. She drafted her acceptance email, fingers moving confidently across the keyboard. Her mentorship program for young women, something she had quietly been shaping, was finally ready to be shared with the world. She no longer needed to look back. She no longer needed closure. She had it. And now she had space for purpose. Just as she hit send, the front door opened. Colin stepped in for his scheduled visit, greeting the kids with a warm smile. They cheered his name and ran into his arms, excitement bubbling over. Alexandra watched from the dining table. No tension, no hesitation, no complicated undercurrent, just peace. Pure peace. Colin noticed her watching and offered a nod, a respectful greeting, not an invitation for deeper conversation. Boundaries were firmly in place, honored on both sides. He sat with the children, helping them color and listening to their dramatic retellings of their block castle victory. He didn't try to insert himself into her space. He didn't cling to moments. He simply existed as a father, consistently, quietly, purposefully. For Alexandra, that alone felt like growth. For Colin, it was redemption, not the theatrical kind, not the kind that begs for applause, but the kind that alters a life's direction. A redemption earned through presence, not promises. That evening, after Colin left and the kids were tucked into bed, Alexandra stepped onto the same balcony where closure had happened days earlier. The sky was a blend of deep blue and soft gold as the sun dipped behind the distant casinos. The city lights flickered to life, a reminder that the world kept turning no matter what storms people survived. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from reflection. 3 years ago, she had moved into Corinne's apartment with nothing but heartbreak, fear, and unborn children who deserved the world. She had built her life from the ground up, choosing dignity when pain tempted her toward bitterness, choosing responsibility when despair tempted her toward giving up, choosing integrity when her circumstances tempted her toward shortcuts. She had chosen the harder path, and it shaped her into someone she respected. Now, as the night deepened, she whispered to herself, "You did it," not as praise, as truth. Everything she carried alone is now carried differently, no longer on her back, but shared between her and a man who finally understood the weight of fatherhood, not because she returned to him, not because she forgave recklessly, but because she learned to set boundaries that protected her heart and her children. Boundaries, not punishment, opened the door for healing. And healing, not romance, opened the door for peace. Inside, the block castle still sat proudly in the center of the living room. Not a tower of plastic pieces, but a symbol, a metaphor for every woman who ever had to rebuild her life after trust was broken. A metaphor for every mother who had to choose strength even when fear sat heavy on her chest. A metaphor for every person who learned that love doesn't always return the way it once existed, but can reshape itself into something healthier. Life had knocked her castle over before, but she rebuilt, and rebuilt, and rebuilt. Now it stood stronger than ever. And tomorrow, if another storm came, she knew she had the resilience to rebuild again. That was her real victory. Not getting Colin back, not proving herself to anyone, but choosing integrity over fear. Every single time. It was the moral she would carry into every story she told, every young woman she mentored, every decision she made. Strength is not about avoiding pain. Strength is about refusing to let pain define your future. She reached down, picked up a stray block from the floor, and placed it gently on the table, a quiet acknowledgement of the chapters she had survived. A quiet acknowledgement of the new era beginning. Then she smiled, not the smile of someone pretending to be healed, the smile of someone who is. And as the lights dimmed and the apartment settled into silence, her voice echoed softly, "This family, this life, this peace, we built it." Before you go, drop a comment about the lesson this story taught you, and subscribe for more powerful stories every week.